Welcome to Scriptura's layer-by-layer overview of Psalm 28. Psalm 28 starts with very direct language. If you are deaf to my cry, I'm going to die. Give to the wicked what they deserve. Repay them. By the end of the psalm, however, David has remembered that the Lord is not only his strength, but the strength of his people as well. How he travels from such extreme emotions to confident leadership is the beauty of this psalm. The structure of Psalm 28 comes from two dominant images. First, the psalmist sees himself on the edge of the pit, which is a picture of facing a shameful early death that would tell the world that God had abandoned him. But when he considers God's justice, he realizes the situation is completely different. Actually, he is in a strong refuge because God does give people what they deserve. He does hear and does help. He is not only David's personal strength and shield, but he is also the strength and refuge for the entire people. The phrase, "Don't be deaf to me," captures the opening desperation as David contemplates what is at risk and worries God will not hear him. But it also sets up the reality that God is not deaf and never lets his people down. The icon for this psalm is a reminder that he does hear. He not only listens to his people's cry, but he responds to it. He gives the wicked the punishment they deserve. He provides strength for his people, and he guides them like a shepherd. We'll go over the basic structure of the psalm before we do a more detailed walkthrough, section by section. Verses 1 and 2 use words that sound similar to focus on a contrast. If God does not reply to David, he will be like those who go down to the pit, those who die the death of the wicked. David pleads with God to hear him when he lifts his hands toward your holy sanctuary. Going down to the pit and the holy sanctuary sound very similar in the Hebrew, which draws attention to the first contrast. Will David focus on his fear of impending death, or will he focus on the source of help, the Lord, represented by his sanctuary or safe place? Verses 3 to 5 introduce the cause for David's problem. They include many more examples of poetic wordplay, which highlight that David's enemies cannot be trusted. The words neighbor and evil sound very similar, with only a slight change of vowel. The change in sound means what first sounded like peace with their neighbors comes to sound like evil in their hearts. This represents the way wicked people deceive others, by appearing to be something they are not. David responds to his enemies by asking God to give them what they deserve for their evil practices. The poem uses a series of poetic devices to request justice and picture that justice punishing the wicked. Their wicked deeds are first represented in the poetry, but then they disappear, and instead the poetry focuses on the righteous acts of the Lord. The poem clearly predicts the bad fate of the wicked in contrast with David's own blessed fate. David's descendants will rule forever according to the covenant. When the wicked come to an end, but David's descendants rule forever, God's justice will be accomplished. In verses 6 and 7, David's response is overwhelming as he delights in the truth about the Lord's character and how he will answer David. He summarizes the familiar story. He trusted in the Lord, who answered. God helped David, so now he praises him. When God saves his faithful people, the right response is to retell the story. God did not intend to only save David, however. There are two kinds of blessing. When people bless the Lord, it is a form of praise. The psalm balances David blessing the Lord, or praising him for saving him, with David's asking the Lord to bless the people as well. David's own role as king was to care for the people. He represented them in front of God. It would not be right for him to live alone in a strong refuge. It is his responsibility to bless his people with the same care and provision that he receives as a blessing from God. David asked God to help his people. He spoke to his neighbor with truth and sincerity in his heart, not evil in his heart, like his enemies. We'll now walk through the psalm section by section.
By David. To you, Lord, I cry out, my rock. Do not be deaf to me, lest you be silent to me, and I become like those who go down to the pit. Hear the sound of my supplications, when I cry to you for help, when I lift up my hands toward your holy inner sanctuary.
Before the first section begins, we have the superscription in verse 1. It explicitly says the psalm is by David, which means we should read it as a psalm from God's anointed, the king over Israel. The king had a covenant relationship with the Lord, which meant he was responsible to lead his people in following the Lord's commands. In turn, God was responsible to deliver him from his enemies. This covenant relationship makes David confident that the Lord will hear him when he asks for help, though, as we will see, he sometimes loses sight of that confidence. In verses 1 and 2, the psalm begins with an outburst. I'm calling to you, Lord, because you're my only hope. Please don't ignore me, or it's all over. I'm fulfilling my role, to cry to you and not to humans, and to lift my hands in expectation to your sanctuary, not the sanctuary of another God. You've got to respond. The sound play already mentioned reminds us that there's more to this than just expressing distress and fear. When we hear how similar "go down to the pit" sounds compared to "your inner sanctuary," we can understand the connection David makes. When he fears death, going down to the pit, he has a very specific response: to reach out to the inner sanctuary, seeking the Lord. Yes, the distress and fear are real, but he does not respond in an uncontrolled, desperate way. David knows what to do, and he is doing it. Whether David speaks with a negative plea, "Don't be deaf," or with an affirmative plea, "Hear the sound of my supplications," he is consistent in his message. He can use two different ways of speaking without changing his message. His message has integrity, which becomes important.
Do not drag me away with wicked people, with evildoers, those who speak peace with their neighbors, but speak evil in their hearts. Give to them that which is according to their deeds, and according to the evil of their practices. Give to them that which is according to the work of their hands. Repay them their dealings. Since they do not regard the deeds of the Lord, and the work of his hands, he will tear them down, and he will not build them up.
In this section, we encounter a key theme, the opposite of integrity, namely the duplicity of evildoers. Duplicity is a way of deceiving people by appearing to be one thing, but really being something different. Again, there is a pair of pleas, with a negative, "Do not drag me away with the wicked," and an affirmative, "Give them what they deserve." Based on how they sound, the pleas are opposites. One is affirmative and one is negative. But the meaning remains consistent, asking God to respond appropriately to what the evildoers are doing, speaking peace with their neighbors, but evil in their own hearts. The enemies say two things that sound very similar, but have opposite meanings. David's speech can sound very different, poetically with a negative and an affirmative, but his meaning remains the same. His message has integrity, compared to the enemies whose message is full of duplicity. This implied contrast sets up a central idea of the psalm. Give to them that which is according to their deeds. David knows God is a God of justice, and that means he can trust him to give people the consequences or rewards that they deserve. Several poetic features in the Hebrew draw attention to this call for justice for the deeds of evildoers. Verse 4d, "Repay them their dealings," is found exactly in the middle of the psalm, with 46 Hebrew words both before and after. Such perfect balance indicates poetic intention to use the wording of the psalm itself to display the message, seeking balance and justice. Before verse 4d are 3 instances of doers, deeds, and work, all referring to the wicked and their actions. After verse 4d, however, they're only the deeds and work of the Lord, showing poetically David's confidence that the deeds of the wicked will be punished, taken care of, and only the Lord's deeds will remain. Most powerfully, there's sound play between the wicked not regarding or paying attention to the deeds of the Lord, and the Lord's decision to not build them up. The Hebrew image of building up is the same for building a family name or lasting line of ruling descendants. An important part of the covenant between the Lord and David was that the Lord would build David's family into a lasting line of kings, a dynasty. David believes that is a sure promise. By contrast, those who do not pay attention to the Lord will be torn down and not built up. Their status in society and their family lines will be forgotten and disappear, while David's family line is guaranteed to continue and prosper. At the same time as the poem calls for the Lord to punish the wicked, the wording shows that the psalmist is confident that the Lord will punish the wicked. The wicked will be torn down by the Lord himself. At the same time, there is also a promise that the Lord already made to David, which is startling when compared to the fate of the wicked. After this point, the deeds of the wicked are not mentioned, and neither are the wicked themselves. Poetically, they have been eliminated.
Blessed be the Lord, for he has heard the sound of my supplications. The Lord is my strength and my shield. In him my heart trusted, and I was helped, and my heart exalted, and with my song I will praise him.
The thought of the wicked disappearing, but David's own family line lasting forever, is all that is needed for another outburst, but this time of praise. Blessed be the Lord, for he has heard the sound of my supplications. In verse 1, David feared the Lord might ignore him. After reviewing what he knows to be true about the Lord's justice and how he deals with humanity, all such fears disappear. Of course the Lord has heard. He promised to hear, and he keeps his promises. Just as the wicked get what they deserved, punishment for their deceit, the psalmist gets his deserved reward for his loyalty. He finds the Lord is his strength and shield, and when he trusts, he is helped, and his heart is joyful. This is the story of the Lord rewarding the people who follow him.
The Lord is the strength of his people, and he is the saving refuge for his anointed. Save your people, and bless your possession, and shepherd them, and carry them forever.
The Lord does not merely reward David, the king, for his own integrity. He rewards all the people the king represents. Verse 7 opens with, "The Lord is my strength." And verse 8 opens identically, except now the Lord is the people's strength. David was not crying out simply for his own good, but as king, acting for the good of his people. Once he acknowledges the Lord as his own strength and shield, he is able to fulfill his role as king, blessing them by going to the Lord in their place to ask for help. Verses 6 to 9 are tied together with the parallel. Blessed be the Lord, and bless your possession, your people. When David cried out, God answered, and David responded, both with praise for God and with a prayer of blessing for the people. Another poetic link between a repeated Hebrew word captures how David fulfills his responsibility as king. In verse 2, David lifted up his hands in prayer to the Lord. The same verb is used when he asks the Lord to lead like a shepherd and carry or lift up the people. Because David lifted up his own hands in prayer, the Lord will in turn lift up the people by caring for them. David has successfully represented his people to the Lord. The result is secure relationships in which the Lord is the source of salvation for his anointed king, and because David is a good king who represents his people to the Lord, the people are saved, blessed, and cared for forever. Psalm 28 presents a mix of fears, insistent arguments, confidence, and joy. As David fears his own early death, he pleads with God for justice. In his plea for the wicked to get the punishment they deserve, he reminds himself of his own relationship with God. His distress over what the wicked have done fades away as he focuses on his hope and his joy over how the Lord has saved and blessed him. The shift from fear to hope and joy enables David to also shift from focusing on himself to focusing on his people. He moves from being a person in trouble who needs God to save his life to being an anointed leader who successfully represents his people to God and secures a blessing for them from the Lord. He asks that God hear him, and God answers with ongoing care and blessing for his people, showing he is a successful leader. David received what he sought. This completes our section-by-section walkthrough of Psalm 28. We'll finish now with a reading of the text that brings everything together.
By David. To you, Lord, I cry out, my rock. Do not be deaf to me, lest you be silent to me, and I become like those who go down to the pit. Hear the sound of my supplications when I cry to you for help, when I lift up my hands toward your holy inner sanctuary. Do not drag me away with wicked people, with evildoers, those who speak peace with their neighbors, but speak evil in their hearts. Give to them that which is according to their deeds and according to the evil of their practices. Give to them that which is according to the work of their hands. Repay them their dealings. Since they do not regard the deeds of the Lord and the work of his hands, he will tear them down, and he will not build them up. Blessed be the Lord, for he has heard the sound of my supplications. The Lord is my strength and my shield. In him my heart trusted, and I was helped, and my heart exulted, and with my song I will praise him. The Lord is the strength of his people, and he is the saving refuge for his anointed. Save your people, and bless your possession, and shepherd them, and carry them forever.